In this episode, we're going to focus on the uncomfortable truth that many privacy failures don't begin with a clever technical exploit at all, but with a human being tricked, pressured, or manipulated. Social engineering is the use of psychological tactics to get someone to reveal information, grant access, or take actions they normally would not take if they had full context. Deception is the broader environment that makes those tactics work, including misleading interfaces, fake identities, and manufactured urgency that pushes people to act before thinking. From a privacy engineering perspective, the problem is not simply that people make mistakes, because people always will, especially under stress. The problem is that systems often make it too easy for deception to succeed by exposing sensitive details, relying on weak verification rituals, and offering unsafe shortcuts that feel like normal work. Defending human factors means designing services so that ordinary users and internal staff can do the right thing even when attackers are trying hard to make the wrong thing feel reasonable. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at CIPT.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A beginner-friendly way to understand social engineering is to see it as an attack on trust pathways rather than on software code. Attackers study how people in an organization communicate, how support requests are handled, what information is considered proof, and where urgency overrides caution. They then craft believable stories that fit those habits, such as pretending to be a customer locked out of an account, a manager who needs a quick report, or a vendor asking for a configuration change. They also use information from public sources and previous leaks to make their stories more convincing, because accurate details lower suspicion. Deception works best when it requires small actions that seem harmless, like confirming whether an account exists or sharing a partial identifier, and then builds to bigger requests once trust is established. Privacy engineering counters this by reducing what can be learned from small probes and by making it harder to perform sensitive actions without strong checks. When you design for human factors, you assume the attacker can be persuasive, and you build friction and verification at the moments where persuasion can cause the most damage. One of the most common entry points for deception is identity verification, especially in customer support and account recovery. Many support processes rely on knowledge-based verification, meaning the person proves identity by answering questions about personal information, such as an address, a date, or a recent transaction. The privacy problem is that personal information is not a secret anymore in many contexts, because it can be guessed, scraped, purchased, or stolen. When a support agent treats personal trivia as proof, the agent becomes an unwitting accomplice, and the organization has turned personal data into a password substitute. Defending human factors means designing verification that does not depend heavily on easily obtainable personal facts, and that does not require sharing more sensitive information than necessary. It also means ensuring that recovery pathways are at least as strong as the primary login pathway, because attackers often skip the front door and go through recovery. When recovery is weak, privacy protections everywhere else can be undone by a single convincing phone call. Another major human factor risk is pretexting, where an attacker creates a believable scenario to obtain access or data. Pretexts often involve authority, such as claiming to be an executive, a compliance auditor, or a security investigator, because people are trained to comply with authority signals. They can also involve sympathy, such as claiming an emergency, a family situation, or an urgent deadline, because people want to help. In privacy contexts, pretexting might target support teams, human resources, finance, or anyone who can see personal data. Defending against pretexting requires clear rules that do not bend under pressure, such as requiring documented processes for sensitive requests and discouraging ad hoc exceptions. It also requires tools that make those rules easy to follow, like structured workflows that guide verification rather than leaving it to judgment in the moment. A system that relies on human intuition to detect deception is fragile because intuition fails under stress and social pressure. Phishing is a well-known form of social engineering, but it is worth understanding why it's a privacy threat, not only a security threat. Phishing often aims to steal credentials, which can lead to account takeover, and account takeover leads directly to exposure of personal data. Phishing can also trick users into revealing personal information directly, such as security codes, addresses, or documents. Deception can be delivered through email, text messages, phone calls, or in-app messages, and it often uses urgency and fear to reduce careful thinking. Privacy engineering defenses here include strong authentication like multi-factor authentication, MFA, but also include designing interfaces and communications so that users can recognize legitimate requests and so that the system rarely asks for sensitive data in ambiguous ways. If your service sometimes asks for a password in an email-like message, you have trained users to fall for phishing. Defending human factors means aligning your legitimate communication patterns with safe user habits, so the safe action becomes the normal action. A subtle but important human factor risk is information leakage through small disclosures, because attackers use small clues to improve their deception. A system that confirms whether an email is registered, reveals a partial phone number, or indicates that a password reset was successful can help attackers validate targets and refine their attempts. Even error messages can leak information, such as revealing whether a username exists or whether a certain authentication method is enabled. Privacy engineering counters this by designing responses that are less informative to attackers while still usable for legitimate users. For example, you can design systems to respond in ways that do not confirm account existence, and you can ensure that recovery notifications are sent to the rightful owner without revealing too much to the requester. This balance is tricky because users need feedback, but it is also crucial because reconnaissance is often the first stage of exploitation. When small probes yield little, attackers lose efficiency, and many move on to easier targets. Internal tools and workflows can also create human factor vulnerabilities when they make it too easy to copy and share sensitive data. If employees can export full user profiles with one click, or if a support interface shows highly sensitive fields by default, you have increased the chance of accidental disclosure and increased the value of manipulating an employee. Attackers sometimes target staff not by hacking systems, but by convincing staff to send data through email or chat. A privacy-aware design reduces this by limiting what is displayed, limiting what can be exported, and providing safer collaboration channels that keep data inside controlled environments. It also uses auditability to create accountability, because accountability discourages casual sharing and helps detect misuse. Defending human factors is not only about training people to be careful, it is about designing tools so the careful path is the easiest path. When unsafe sharing requires extra steps and leaves traces, it becomes less likely to happen under social pressure. Deception is also enabled by ambiguity in roles and responsibilities, which is why clear internal policies must be connected to system enforcement. If staff are unsure whether they are allowed to share certain data, they may defer to whoever sounds confident or urgent. If policies exist only in documents and not in workflow, they are forgotten during real incidents. Privacy engineering can reduce this ambiguity by embedding checks into systems, such as requiring explicit reasons for accessing sensitive data, limiting access to role-appropriate views, and requiring approvals for high-risk actions. These embedded checks act like guardrails for human behavior, and they reduce the chance that a persuasive attacker can create an exception in the moment. They also reduce inconsistency, because decisions become less dependent on individual personality and more dependent on consistent process. The goal is to make the correct choice feel normal and supported, not personally confrontational. Another common social engineering vector is deception through impersonation in communication channels, especially when channels are informal. Attackers can join group chats, spoof email addresses, or create look-alike accounts that mimic real employees or customers. If an organization relies on informal messaging for sensitive tasks, such as sharing customer data or approving changes, attackers can exploit the lack of strong identity signals. Privacy engineering responds by limiting sensitive actions to authenticated and audited systems rather than chat threads, and by ensuring that approvals and data sharing happen through controlled workflows. It also involves making sure that internal communication channels have clear identity indicators and that staff understand which channels are trusted for which kinds of actions. The more you can separate casual conversation from sensitive operations, the harder deception becomes. A system that treats chat as a control plane for data is inviting social engineering to become a privacy incident. Users also face deception through user interface patterns that trick them into giving away more than they realize, which connects human factors to design ethics. Some interfaces are designed to nudge users toward sharing, such as making privacy-protective options hard to find or phrased confusingly. Even when this is done for business reasons like improving engagement, it creates an environment where users are habituated to clicking through confusing prompts. That habituation makes external deception more effective because users learn that they can't understand prompts anyway, so they just comply. Privacy engineering defenses include making consent and settings clear, using plain language, and ensuring that privacy choices are real and respected. When users feel in control, they are more likely to notice odd requests and to question unusual messages. Clarity is not only good ethics. It is a defense against social engineering because it builds user confidence and reduces compliance with ambiguous demands. Defending human factors also includes designing for safe failure, because sometimes deception will succeed. When that happens, the system should limit damage through containment and recovery. Containment includes limiting what any one account can access, limiting what can be exported, and monitoring for unusual patterns that suggest compromised credentials or manipulated staff. Recovery includes making it possible to regain control of an account without exposing more personal information, and ensuring that sensitive changes trigger notifications to the rightful user. It also includes the ability to roll back harmful changes, such as restoring contact details or revoking unauthorized sessions. From a privacy perspective, this is crucial because the duration of compromise often determines the severity of harm. A system that detects anomalies quickly and supports recovery reduces the attacker's leverage and reduces the likelihood that stolen data becomes coercion. Training and culture still matter, but privacy engineering treats them as the final layer, not the only layer. People can be taught to recognize urgency tactics, to verify unusual requests, and to use official workflows for sensitive actions. However, training decays, people get tired, and new staff join, which is why systems must be designed to make safe behavior the default. A strong privacy posture creates a culture where pausing to verify is normal and where refusing an urgent request without proper verification is supported rather than punished. It also creates clarity about escalation paths, so staff know who to involve when a request feels suspicious. Culture is strengthened when the system backs it up, because staff feel less alone when saying no. When systems and culture align, deception becomes harder because attackers rely on pushing people into isolated, fast decisions. As we close, remember that social engineering and deception succeed when attackers can exploit normal human traits like helpfulness, respect for authority, fear of conflict, and urgency under pressure. Privacy engineering counters that by reducing the value of small disclosures, strengthening identity verification and recovery, and designing tools that minimize exposure by default. It also counters deception by embedding guardrails into workflows so sensitive actions require context, justification, and traceable approvals. When communication patterns are clear and consistent, users and staff can recognize what legitimate requests look like, and phishing becomes less effective. And when containment and recovery are built in, the harm from inevitable mistakes is limited rather than catastrophic. Defending human factors is not about blaming people for being human. It is about designing systems that respect human limitations and protect human dignity when someone tries to weaponize trust.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.